diagnosis of antisocial personality, you all agree on that?
Yes.
Okay. And on borderline personality, you all agree on that?
Yes.
And malingering, you all four agree on that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I know that you have been qualified as an expert in forensic psychology and testified numerous times. Have you ever been qualified as an expert in sex offenders?
Yes.
In court?
Yes.
Okay. What about antisocial personality disorder?
So I don't remember ever, back in the days when we qualified the experts, I don't remember being specifically qualified in that diagnosis any more than schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So I don't think so, Ms. Curtis.
Nonetheless, you have diagnosed individuals with antisocial personality disorder.
Yes, it's one of the most common diagnoses in the criminal system, the criminal justice system.
Okay. Any ballpark you could give me on how many times?
Oh, no. It's frequently used. It's like substance abuse is another frequently used condition. So it's been used, I've used it a lot. I wouldn't say in the majority of cases, but certainly, again, the DSM-5 TR tells us it's one of the most frequent diagnoses. You find most of those conditions or diagnoses, or a great preponderance of them, in jail or in prison.
Okay. I mean, would you say it might be in the hundreds?
Oh, easily. Sure.
Okay. Thousands?
So at last count, I've done over 20,000 evaluations in my career. A lot of those are competency evals, of course, but so I've done over 20,000. So, or at least that's what my computer tells me in terms of my count. So, so could I have given that diagnosis thousands of times? I think that's a possibility. It sounds like a lot, but I think it's a possibility.
Okay. How many times when you've diagnosed antisocial personality disorder did you rely on the subject's use of swastikas or other hate symbols?
So I would say a handful of times. I'd say that material was available to me. It's usually available, usually in first-degree murder cases, you get more information, more material. So I'd say 10 times or less.
10 times or less?
That's just a guess. I mean, I certainly have seen that material before as part of my review, but it's really the exception, and that's because you just don't get that material on downward departures or competencies or even sanities to that degree.
Okay, and are you talking now about when you are testifying as a defense expert that you're not getting the material?
So it really depends. Sometimes it's just not relevant to the legal issue. As a forensic psychologist, you'd always want to see what the legal issue is. For instance, on something on sanity or competency, I wouldn't ask for that material, I wouldn't request it or see it as relevant, or a Miranda waiver. So in a lot of the cases that I do, sex offender cases that you mentioned, or risk assessment, some of those it may not be as relevant as it is in others, like for diagnostic purposes. So I generally don't request it unless I think it's relevant to the issue or it's produced for me and it's consistent with my diagnosis.
Okay, but I'm talking about just when you've diagnosed antisocial personality. So in that instance, where that is the contemplated diagnosis, are you saying you might not have been given that material because maybe whoever wanted that diagnosis wouldn't have given it to you?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm suggesting is it may not have been available. I mean, I hate to say this, but I've been doing this for 3 decades, so we didn't have social media when I first started. So a lot of those early cases, I didn't see that. It may not have been relevant. A person may not have been posting relevant materials before. And you specifically use the modifier of swastikas, so that makes it even less likely that I would have reviewed social media that included swastikas. That's a subset of a subset of a subset. Okay.
So, as you said, it's 10 times or less where you have made a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder that I assume in part, never in whole, related to the use of hate symbols or swastikas.
Well, again, adding the term swastika. So I think it's probably less than 10 times I've seen social media posts that I've used to assist in diagnosing that included swastikas. There's other things, racial epithets and things like that, and anti-Semitism. But in terms of you're asking about swastikas, and this is purely speculation on my part, I think that's likely less than 10 times.
Okay. So is it your testimony that the drawing of swastikas represents a racist ideology?
So it's anti-Semitic by definition. The symbol itself is anti-Semitic, especially if you realize the history of that symbol and also what it's been used for. And if your intended impact is to shock people, get attention for doing that. So if you're aware of it, use it in that way and are aware of the history of it, then yes, it's anti-Semitic.
How do you view, or what is your definition of a racist ideology?
So while I would think that anything that has to do with Ku Klux Klan would certainly fit that mold. So if you're also talking about racist, you can also talk about far groups who may hate as well. So anyone who hates as a result of skin color or ethnic orientation, hates a person just because of that specific trait or quality.
Okay. Other than the swastika, what evidence in the records supports anti-Semitism?
Searches on Hitler, Eva Braun, Germany, Holocaust. All of those things would be consistent. It's not just the searching of them, it's using symbols in a way acknowledging that it was meant to get attention. There's no better way to get attention than to choose the most reprehensible symbol possible, utilize that or others.
Right, but I mean, you would agree with me that doing something to get attention might be different than doing something because it's something you, right, truly believe in.
It would be, but that's in this case.
Okay. I mean, and you would also agree with me that Hitler is also a historical figure. Lots of people research him, lots of people write books about him.
Right, but there's no questioning what Hitler did and what Hitler is most famous for. So you have to put that in context. Isolated, a historical review of Hitler might be one thing, but when you put it in the context of other social media searches that are consistent with people who are involved in hateful activities and anti-Semite and racial type of ideologies, misogyny, those type of things in context tell us about a person's mindset.
Okay. You said people involved in hateful activities? So from the records, what activities did you find Mr. Cruz involved in?
Well, you could just say alone placing swastikas on materials for people to see as hateful because it's anticipating a reaction of revulsion by other people. So just the very fact of doing that alone. So it's not just the interest, it's using those things. It's writing on a backpack, I hate the N-word or fucking N-word. So those type of things are meant to cause harm or to hurt people and to enjoy the impact of that and to know there's attention that comes from that. It's what allows people to dehumanize other people and act in series of acts of against them.
Right. So what I'm asking is what, other than the swastikas, because, so let me just back up. We talked about how, and we haven't gone specifically into each individual swastika, but just in general, the drawing of swastikas. And I was asking you about how you believe that represents a racist ideology and what is the racist ideology.
Yes.
Okay, and then you said researching Hitler, historical, and I said it was a historical figure, correct?
Yes,
and you
ma'am.
said in context.
Right.
Right? And the context here, you're also drawing swastikas.
Right.
Okay, so is it those two things? Is that, I'm just asking.
No, I understand you.
Those two things. Or is there something more, is what I'm asking.
So it's just engaging and making others aware. It's making public that that's what you're doing, that you have an interest in that you're talking about those things like the Holocaust and talking about Nazi Germany and using swastikas. It's engaging in that kind of discussion public and displaying them. It's not being done for a book report. It's being done for effect. It's being done to get people's attention and to be repulsed. But it's also mental training to be able to engage in aggressive behavior against others by dehumanizing them.
Okay, so did he search for things regarding Hitler and the Holocaust, or did he engage in discussions about it, or both?
So he did both. He searched Hitler, Eva Braun. He searched for those things, Germany, the swastika, and he also engaged in posts that were, expressing what he was doing and talking about. And then he talked about it again in his interviews, like with Dr. Scott.
Okay, right. Dr. Scott, and I think you and I'm not going to do that again, but you and Marcus sort of read through that portion of his interview.
Yes, ma'am.
Which I'm going to put the whole thing into evidence in a few moments, but I don't think we have it yet, right? No? Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Was it?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay.
Back to the interview with Dr. Scott that you just referenced.
Can you tell me which one?
The, I can tell you. From March 1st, I think that was the first day, page 371, I think is where, I don't remember exactly where you started reading.
I have it in front of me.
If you look on page 371, you and Mr. Marcus sort of went through this
Yes.
earlier. And Dr. Scott says, any time where someone might have thought you were carving a swastika.
Can you tell me where you're reading from, Ms. Cruz?
I'm sorry, it's starting on line 5, page 371.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Got it.
Okay. So, and you went through this earlier. I don't want to read through the entire thing, but Dr. Scott continues to ask him questions about it. Why did you do it? For attention. What kind of attention? And he asks for 3 pages, and I don't want to speculate as to why, but he doesn't ever get Mr. Cruz to say, because I hate Jewish people, or I'm an anti-Semite, or I'm a Nazi. He never says that, right?
Right.
Okay. Is there any place in the DSM that says that a swastika or any other symbol relates to the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder?
No.
Okay.
It's not that specific.
Okay. Are you aware of recent research that says anti-Semitism is not really indicative of any specific mental disorder?
Well, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Sure.
And you would agree with me that racism or anti-Semitism are learned behaviors, correct?
They certainly can be. There can be a basis in terms of brain wiring to make some people more liable to expose themselves to those kinds of materials. But yes, a lot of it is exposure to in their environment. So there's definitely a nature-nurture kind of a link to it. But it requires you to be exposed to it, which social media allows us to also have underlying attitudes like lack of remorse, lack of guilt over things, those kinds of things, lack of empathy.
Okay, right. But I mean, people aren't born hating any particular group.
Well, I think
of
you'd probably
people,
get a debate. So it's probably, we always wind up with it's both. So some people are probably pre-wired in terms of their brain to pursue certain activities, and other people are probably, coached more by the environment, what happens in terms of the consequences of their behavior in the real world. So we'll come up with our same mental health explanation and say it's both.
Okay. Now, you indicated that the drawing of swastikas, in your opinion, is attention-seeking behavior.
Well, not if they're for yourself. Not if you put them in your own private notebook and put a lock and key on it and keep it in your top drawer. But if you display it or leave it at the scene of a school shooting where 17 people have been murdered, if you do those kinds of things or leave it out for other people to see, then that is a bit of a problem. So it depends on context again.
Okay, so your answer included evidence from this case. So you're saying in this case, the drawing of swastikas was attention-seeking behavior.
It is. So if you're keeping it as a historical symbol to yourself because you think it's interesting or intriguing, because you're, again, doing some type of research in that area, that's one thing. But you have someone waving it proudly over their head or at least displaying it on clothing, weapons, as well as magazines that are left for specific purposes, for people to notice them.
Okay. And you don't happen to have on you a copy of the DSM-5,
I absolutely, I do, yes.
Okay. Can we go to page 748?
Yes. Are you talking about the DSM-5 or TR? 5 TR?
I have the TR.
Okay, perfect, yes, that's the one I
Okay.
have, most recent edition. Okay, so give me that page number again, Ms. Curtis.
748.
748, got it.
Ms. Curtis, do you have I don't have a DSM here. Do you have a copy of the page you're referencing, or
I can send you the PDF. Do you want me to do that?
of the whole book?
Yeah.
I can do that.
Well, actually, if it's accessible online, I can just look it up myself. Is it? Do you know?
I don't know how I got it. Oh, we purchased it.
You know what?
Your Honor, if the
Yeah.
court wants me to stand up during this, I can share my copy with the court. Whatever's the court's preference, but
Well, let me
Yeah.
ask you this. Are you going to be referencing numerous things?
Probably.
Then I think we should just take a 5-minute recess, and
Okay.
Judge Forth will lend me his.
Okay,
I just need 5 minutes for
Okay.
them to run over, if that's okay.
that's fine.
Make sure you get the TR.
Judge, I have a copy downstairs. Can we run down and get it? You can borrow it.
or Judge, I can give you my copy if Ms. Curtis will step forward and share her copy with me. That's another possibility as well.
I have some. I have some
Oh,
of
I'm
the
sorry.
Xerox that I need.
Judge,
So
I'm gonna go get a copy for you.
It's okay, because
no, it's fine. I can give the doctor my copy, and you can.
Or we can look at your copy together. And
does have an extra
I'll
copy.
go get it.
Turns out, the person I was gonna ask to loan me a copy has an outdated version.
Judge, would that be a good time for my Fonte source?
Sure. Thank you. I think he said the 5 was from 2013. They were in
That's before we go.
Oh,
There's nothing on there. You're on. You know he has to go.
oh, thank you. Is Curtis oh no, he's in the bathroom, sorry. Okay, the lawyers are present, the defendant is present. The state has loaned me a copy of the DSM-5 TR,
Okay.
and whenever you're ready.
Okay, before we do that, I wanted to go back a minute. This is the cover.
That's what?
Do you want to look at the transcript of the whole?
You need to read the whole thing?
No. I mean, do you want to look at it, make sure it is what I'm asking?
You say that's what it is, it is. Unless you want me to read it, I'll read it.
No, I don't need you to read it. Judge, well, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Okay. I'm going to try to just show him. This is 3 folders. Do you recognize this folder and what's inside of it? Actually, what's inside of it, not the folder.
On the outside of the folder says Dr. Scott. So that's a kind of a guess. And let's see, this is, the first page is the evaluation of the defendant in this case. Looks like Dr. Scott's, without going through every page, it looks like Dr. Scott's interview of the defendant in this case.
Okay, and that is something that you read?
I did.
In preparation?
Yeah,
Okay,
I did.
and then you can put that back. Okay, and then I'm going to show you this. Do you recognize what's inside that folder?
This is, again, more evaluation of the defendant by Dr. Scott.
Okay, that's day 2?
Yes, March 2nd.
Okay, and you reviewed that entire video and read that entire transcript,
did.
correct? Okay. And I have one more.
So this is the third day, again, without looking at all the pages, but this is the third day of the evaluation by Dr. Scott of the defendant.
Okay, and you reviewed that entire video and read that
I
entire
did,
transcript,
yes.
correct? Okay, and that's the interview that you viewed, what you read in its entirety, correct?
Sure, I mean, with the assumption that all pages are there from all of the interview, yes.
Okay. Judge, at this time, we're going to ask to put the entire interview from Dr. Scott from March 1st to March 3rd of 2021.
Okay, did you say what was
It's-
marked for identification?
It's marked as Defense A.
Okay, any objection?
There's no objection, but perhaps the defense, there's a couple thousand pages there, I'm not sure if they want to point out particular relevancy. I mean, there's a lot of things in there. It's like 30 hours if you watched it on video, or not 30 hours, but
20.
20 hours.
Ms. Curtis, are you going to narrow down what exactly you want the court to consider?
If I do refer to it, yes. We just wanted the entire thing in so that it's not out of context. If there's something else that the court needs to look at in context.
I understand. Okay, Defense Composite Exhibit A will be received as Defense Composite Exhibit 1.
Okay. Before we go through the DSM, I wanted to ask you, go back on a couple of things. What evidence or research are you familiar with that connects brain wiring to hatred, racial hatred in particular?
So we don't know that. There's been different research that tells us that some people are just born more aggressive or more inclined to engage in aggressive or hateful behavior, but we don't know that with any specificity, which is why we give the answer that it's likely a combination of your brain wiring or how your brain is structured in your environment. So we know, for instance, some people just engage in aggressive behavior without any environmental influences, and people with awful environmental influences don't engage in aggression at all. So we don't know the answer to that. That's why we're still struggling with that nature-nurture question.
Okay, so I'm sorry, are you saying that you're not familiar with research that actually says that brain wiring is related to hatred, or the
To
literature
hatred?
says you just don't know?
So it says that we believe at this level that there's contributions of both.
Okay.
So we can't put a percentage on. We don't have that kind of precision in psychology to say that. And the research doesn't have that level of precision. So it would be hard to untangle those two to be able to attribute one to what you're born with and one to what you're exposed to in your world. So it'd be very difficult to do that kind of research. I mean, we can do some twin studies and kind of see about twins raised in different environments and what happens to them, identical twins. But that'd be very difficult research to do in general.
Okay. And there isn't anything in the evidence that you reviewed for this entire case that would show that this crime in particular was racially motivated, correct?
So not specifically racially motivated, no.
Okay. And when we were talking about swastikas being attention-seeking, you said something about to get a reaction out of people, correct?
Right. So that's Dr. Scott, correct.
Okay, and, right, but I mean, you would agree, the reason you're saying that it's attention-seeking behavior is because it's something that is, and I think you made some comment about how it's one of the most hateful symbols in our world, correct?
Yes, correct.
Right, because it's so inflammatory. That would be what gets people's reaction, correct?
Right, it's the display of the symbol. So it's not just the symbol itself, it's the choosing to display that symbol at strategic times and places.
Right. Okay. So now let's go to page 748 of the DSM-TR.
I'm there.
And this is where the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality are found, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And can you tell me in here where the attention-seeking behavior is mentioned as a criteria for antisocial personality disorder?
So there is no reference to attention-seeking behavior.
Okay. So then let's go through the diagnostic criteria and determine what the swastikas would be related to.
Okay.
So criteria A is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15 as indicated by 3 or more of the following, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so number 1, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. Does the swastika relate to that particular criteria?
So I'd start even a little bit higher. I'd start with a pervasive pattern of disregard, which you read, in violation of the rights. So viewing not only swastikas, but viewing German ideology and also viewing things in terms of the Holocaust as a direct violation of people's rights, and shows specifically an interest in those type of things. And by viewing things of people going to gas chambers and people being killed as a result of being Jewish, I think that directly impacts upon someone's violation of their rights. I can't think of a higher calling than that in terms of an interest.
Right. But I mean, it doesn't just say a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of rights. It says it has to be indicated by one of the following 7 criteria, or at least, 3 or more of the following. So I'm trying to go through 1 through 7, and I want to see, does the drawing and displaying of swastikas show a failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest?
So specifically, viewing things in terms of unlawful behaviors, viewing things or attempting to search for things like, for instance, pornography, where,
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the swastika. We're just talking about swastikas.
Oh, yeah,
right
only
now.
swastikas.
No, we'll come back to that later.
Okay, sure. So viewing swastikas and being involved in looking at things with Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, all of those things would certainly not be legal behaviors.
Okay.
So being involved and being committed to looking at those things violates social norms, but it also is, it's involved in viewing and taking interest in things that clearly are illegal, people being killed because they're Jewish.
Right, but I mean, so are you saying that does fit in with criteria 1? Because it's grounds or him engaging in lawful behavior. So viewing things is not unlawful. Doing things is unlawful.
So unlawful things certainly would be looking at things that would be illegal, and killing people or viewing or watching other people in Holocaust situations would certainly be an illegal behavior.
Illegal behavior by looking at it or illegal behavior by doing it?
Well, it depends. Depends on what information you're looking at, depending on what you're viewing at the time. So it certainly is illegal behavior, and an interest in that would show a violation of social norms.
I mean, there are movies out there, right, about the Holocaust where you see people being killed, right?
Sure. If it's real images, though, of somebody who's looking that up on the internet, you'd certainly, I think most people would agree, that's a violation of social norms.
Okay, but what I'm asking you is that drawing or looking at swastikas, or even going on the internet and looking up stuff about the Holocaust, is not a failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest, right?
So just looking at a swastika alone, no, would not meet that criteria.
Okay. What about deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure?
And you're talking about just looking at swastikas.
Yes, I'm talking about, well, looking at or displaying them on your personal belongings.
So no,
Okay.
that would not necessarily, although he does make different comments about the reasons for using the swastika. So it's a display of a peace symbol, and then it's a display that he knows of Nazi Germany. So there is certainly some evidence of deceitfulness about his reasons for using it.
Okay, but the displaying of them, the fact that they exist on his belongings, that in of itself does not
No.
show that. Okay.
Correct.
And you know what, I want to back up for a second, maybe just so that I don't keep going back over. Number one, the failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors. In your review of the records, did you see numerous facts or circumstances that would support that criteria?
So there are facts that support that in addition to the swastikas. Yes, it just adds incrementally another behavioral sample to that.
Okay, I'm sorry, maybe my question wasn't that clear. So going back to one for a second, we said that the looking at or drawing or displaying swastikas in and of itself is not an unlawful behavior, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but so now my question is, putting that aside, going through the records, his school records, his Henderson behavioral health records, the BSO records, there are numerous incidents throughout those
Right.
that would support number one under A, correct?
Right. So I'm sorry, Ms. Kirsch. I thought I said yes to that. Yes, that was just another example, another incremental example of it.
Okay. And then we said it didn't apply to 2. Number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. And I think, in fact, you testified earlier it was sort of the opposite of that, right?
He is
In terms
planning
of
ahead.
drawing swastikas and displaying them on your things, you testified that it's him thinking about what people might do, right?
So it actually can be both. So you can impulsively look at an image like pornography, but here we're talking about swastikas. So you can impulsively look at things, but still plan on the results of that. So your behavior in the short run, you can impulsively look or view something, or consider that on a frequent basis, like make many searches for it. So that can be the impulsive part. But thinking in terms of the impact and the effect of that can be the planful part. So you can actually have both components of a behavior.
Okay, but I'm not talking about impulsively. What I'm talking about is taking an item of yours and etching a swastika on it. I mean, that, in terms of, and I'm just going through these, that doesn't support impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Just taking a boot and drawing a swastika
So
on
now
it.
you've made the example even smaller. So you're talking about now drawing or etching things into a boot. So in terms of impulsivity, I mean, certainly not considering, some things like how people's emotional reactions to that might be problematic, supportive, antisocial. But in terms of planning ahead, there's good examples here that he did plan ahead in to that behavior in terms of impact.
Right. But the criteria that we're talking about, it says failure to plan ahead, right?
Right.
So, I don't know, I'm probably not making myself clear.
No, I understand. I'm just saying it's both. I'm saying there's some degree of impulsivity in terms of doing that, but also planning ahead. So there's both. It's just different aspects of the same behavior.
Okay, so it is your testimony that the drawing and displaying of swastikas does support number 3 under A of this criteria.
Number A,
Well, letter A, a pervasive pattern.
yes.
And
yes.
this is because it requires 3 or more, right?
Yes.
Okay, and you're saying the drawing of swastikas on your belongings and displaying them does show an impulsivity or failure to plan ahead.
So I'm saying that displaying them in the way that they were displayed here for the impact and effect that they had certainly meets the criteria, in my opinion, for antisocial. Now, you wouldn't use that alone to diagnose antisocial personality disorder. It's just one factor or one criteria. You mentioned there's other places where we can do that, and certainly it just augments that. It gives more confidence to a diagnosis knowing someone's involved in that.
Right. And I understand. Just trying to go through one by one to figure out which of these you believe the drawing and displaying of swastikas on your belongings that other people will see, what that fits into in the diagnostic criteria for antisocial.
So you're excluding searches or anything like that in terms
Yes,
of,
right
okay.
now we're only talking about, because I believe the first three, I would have to check that up. The first three photos that were shown to you were the drawn or etched swastikas
Yes.
on the boot, on the magazine, and on the back.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, that's all I'm talking about right now.
Okay.
Okay. So 3 on that, yes, or 3, no.
So I don't think that you could meet criteria just based on the isolated example you gave. You couldn't meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder just based on that. So in the
Okay.
way that you limited it, no, I don't think you could, nor would you, based on one sample of behavior.
Okay. So then there's no need for me to read through the rest of them. You're saying it doesn't fit into these. That specifically does not fit into these.
So the way that you isolated that sample of behavior, the way that you did that in terms of making it a singular event, no, it wouldn't be criteria.
Okay. Can we turn just for a moment to page 757?
Okay?
And this is the diagnostic criteria for histrionic personality disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that is a pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following.
Yes.
Okay. So number 4 is consistently uses physical appearance to draw attention to self.
Yeah.
Okay, so drawing a swastika on your backpack and walking around with it, that would be something, that would fit into this, correct?
It could.
Okay. Drawing it on your boot, if you can see it, would, correct?
It could, sure.
Okay. And just before we leave this, because I know this was not your testimony, but do you believe, or did you consider this diagnosis?
So I did. I considered all of them because there's considerable overlap in personality disorders, which is why I said there's some borderline features as well. So certainly I considered all of them in terms of diagnosing him. I don't think he meets the full criteria for that. I think the best description of him is antisocial personality disorder.
Okay. All right. So we may come back to that in a moment. So I want to go through, before we leave this for a moment, okay, so we'll come back to A in a moment, but for the rest of the criterion, he's at least 18 years of age, which clearly he meets that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15.
So are we back to antisocial personality disorder?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, got it.
So, do you believe there's evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15?
Yes.
Okay, and what are you basing that on?
His behavior as described by Ms. Broward, B-R-O-W-D, one early on, his school records, his own reports of what he viewed and what he looked at over a period of time during that period of time, like, for instance, early exposure to pornography, violence, aggression, fighting with other people, teachers being thrown out of school, behavior that's reported by his mom, going into psychiatrist's office, his foster mom, Linda Cruz. So all of those things and more.
Okay. So this wasn't something where you relied on somebody else's diagnosis. This is your independent review and deciding that he meets the criteria for conduct disorder.
Right. I didn't rely on other people's diagnosis. I relied on their materials since I didn't interview him.
Okay. Okay, and the occurrence of antisocial behavior is not exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That applies here, correct? In your opinion?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so going back to number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. In your review of all of the records that you reviewed in this case, did you find an abundant amount of evidence to show that he's impulsive and fails to plan ahead in some respects?
Yes.
Okay. Irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. That, in terms of the drawing of the SWAT, does not apply to this, right?
So again, going back to your isolated example of drawing of swastikas, that's correct.
Okay, but throughout your review of the records, there's significant evidence that supports irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults.
Right, including social media exposure to aggressive images and hateful images, correct.
Okay, reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Would the drawing and displaying of swastikas fit into that category?
So I would say it does.
Okay, how so?
Because in terms of reactions that people may have to that, not having a conceptualization of how strongly people might feel about that, and being aggressive or violent towards you as a result, or having to defend yourself against people who may react strongly to that, one of the most, again, reprehensible, deplorable symbols that we have, puts you in a position where you're not really considering the safety of others or yourself. Matter of fact, I think he says at one point that he's like to get beat up as a result of it. So those things don't really consider yourself or other people in terms of the possible impact or effect on safety.
Okay, so you do believe it does fall into 5.
I do.
Okay, and through your review of the records, did you find other evidence that he had a disregard for the safety of self or others?
Yes, inclusive as other social media as well, if you're including that, yes.
Okay, what about in his school records? Did you find any evidence of that in his school records?
Yes, it's one of the sources of information I relied on for that, absolutely.
Okay, so like, for example, jumping out of the bus while it's moving, correct?
Certainly.
Okay. All right, number 6, consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. The drawing and displaying of swastikas would not apply on this one, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And did you find evidence in the records to support this one?
What is
Number 6, I'm sorry. Evidence in the records to support a consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations.
To some degree, yes.
Okay, do you recall what that is?
So only in terms of him being irresponsible, with monies, et cetera. But he did work a couple of different positions. So that one's more equivocable.
I'm sorry,
More equivocable, more.
Okay, I just didn't hear you. Okay. Lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Does the drawing and displaying of swastikas fit that one?
I think that's the best example of what it fits.
Okay. What, other than just the displaying of it, I mean, is it just the displaying of it that you believe is indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt or mistreated?
It's a callous indifference to how other people emotionally may react to that. You may get attention for it and plan for that, But in terms of having a recognition of how a hateful symbol like that, the impact it has on them and their perceptions of their own history and what's gone on within their own families and friends of their families, et cetera, that's a complete callous disregard, lack of remorse, lack of ability to empathize with somebody else's feelings, just like all of these images on social media.
Okay, and what, other than the fact that he did it, and he said he did it for attention, good or bad, he said, right?
Yes.
What evidence do you have that he was indifferent to or rationalizing having done this to hurt someone else?
There is no good other explanation for using a Nazi symbol to be able to display a time where you've just murdered 17 people and wounded 17 others, and leaving that on an open display for people to see to cause an emotional reaction in them, and to have a lack of feeling or content about how those people might react in some way and to feel badly about what their reactions might be, just not about shooting and killing people, but also in seeing that kind of a symbol. I think there's no other example, except in his other social media posts, about lack of remorse and guilt.
Okay, so you're assuming that because he put it on there when he went to commit this crime and left it there, that that was a conscious decision to further hurt people when it was found?
I think
Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's attention-seeking, but I think that to not appreciate the impact that and other images and other words might have, I think that's a hallmark of antisocial personality disorder. So I'd say in totality, the social media posts, including the swastikas, and how he's chosen to use those and what he's spoken to people about in those media posts, I think is a very important opening of the window into his brain about how he thinks about these images and his lack of ability to show empathy and remorse.
Well, I'm sorry, I think I'm a little bit confused. You said to not appreciate it is the hallmark, and maybe we're using appreciate in a different way.
Emotional reaction.
I guess what I'm saying to you is that in order for what you're saying to be true, would he have to have thought about that and decided in his mind, not only am I going to go and kill a bunch of people, but I'm also going to leave a magazine with a swastika on it just for the extra? Is that what you think he was thinking?
Sure. People do things on purpose. They do things for impact. People don't do things like a symbol like a swastika on a murder weapon at the scene of this incident where it happened, and also put that on their boot, and also put that on a backpack or other racial epithets. They don't do that just because they think it's interesting. It's just because they think that'll be a fun thing, or maybe other people will talk to me about it who like that too. They do it for impact, but they do it because they lack an appreciation, if you have an antisocial personality disorder, of the true emotional impact that can have on other people.
Okay. Is it also possible, and we also know from the interview, at least from what Mr. Cruz said, that he didn't actually draw that swastika, not that that matters, but...
So he, in both cases with Dr. Scott, he certainly did, which is consistent with antisocial personality disorder, he diffused responsibility onto other people. They asked me to do it, someone else asked me to do it, I was told to do that, they said it'd be fun, so that's consistent with antisocial, is blaming others for your behavior.
Right. So, I'm sorry, do you have evidence that his friend, Jameson Todd, was not the one who drew the swastika on the magazine?
So my reading of what he said to Dr. Scott is that he was told to do that. He was told by other people to do that. I think it was in the first interview that he did. So he was told to do that by other people, talking about the magazine, talking about the desk.
Okay, let's go back there just for a second, because maybe I'm confused about that. Okay, so on the same page that we looked at before, on page 371, starting at the bottom, well, halfway down about, on page 50, I'm sorry, line 15 of page 371. In fact, Mr. Cruz volunteers this information to him, right? Magazine, I'm sure you know about that.
Can you tell me what line you're on?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me what line you're on, Maria?
Yes, 15.
15, okay.
Okay. and he's telling Dr. Scott's asking him about these swastikas that he drew, and he said, and I'm sure you know about the magazine. And the doctor says, yes, I did, and he says, I didn't write that at all. Where did that come from? Jameson Todd asked me if he wanted to draw a swastika on it, and so I said, sure. I didn't think anything of it, so he drew the swastika on the magazine. Now, Mr. Cruz admits swastika on his boot, correct?
Right,
And he admits that he drew the swastika on his backpack, right?
right.
Okay, so what evidence do you have that Jameson Todd did not draw the swastika or carve the swastika on the magazine?
So that's the problem that you have, is that we know he's malingering. So we don't know what's the truth and what isn't in these episodes. So what he's telling us in terms of a diffusion of responsibility, even at the time of the murder of 17 people, he still diffuses responsibility to other people. Here you have another example of diffusion of responsibility. So we don't know. What we know is his social media tells us what he's really thinking. But in terms of what he says here to Dr. Scott, we don't know what he's trying out and not trying out, because we can't separate out what's faking and what's real. So we don't know is the answer to that.
Okay, right. So in other words, there is evidence that Mr. Well, his name is Jameson Todd Sneed, but that Jameson Todd didn't do it. We
Correct.
don't know that,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Okay, and perhaps maybe he did, right?
We just know he left that at the scene.
Right, okay. And we also know that magazines aren't free, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so perhaps not thinking ahead, and he let him do that, and then he decides he needs to go to MSD to shoot people, and he's got a magazine, and maybe that's one that he has, right? I mean, it may not have been a conscious, it might have been, I need a magazine, and this is the one I have, right? I mean, that is possible.
I think that's a very low probability outcome, Ms. Curtis, that leaving a magazine with a swastika on it along with an assault rifle with a swastika on it while wearing a boot with a swastika on it was somehow coincidental.
Okay. Just a moment, I'm sorry. So you reviewed Dr. Scott's interview, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And his deposition, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I want to have you review, just briefly, it shouldn't take very long. Actually, can I have a moment? Sure. May I first look, Mr. Judge? Sure. So I asked you earlier if you reviewed the 90-slide PowerPoint that Dr. Scott did.
Yes.
And you said you did not,
Correct.
Okay. Can you take just a moment to look through that?
Did you say take a moment to go through 90 pages?
I know, it's not as much as you think it is. The writing is very big and there's not a lot of it on each page. It shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes.
So you're asking me to read everything on these 90 slides?
Well, yeah.
I'm okay with that. I'm just making
Yeah.
sure that that's what you're asking me to do.
Okay.
Yes? That's
Yes.
what you're asking me to do? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Messed up all your papers.
No worries. Okay. So, you reviewed Dr. Scott's interview, correct?
I did a brief scan of it, yes, I did.
Well, okay, the PowerPoint. You
The
reviewed
PowerPoint,
that.
yes,
Okay, and the entire interview,
I did.
and the, I guess, initial part of his deposition, right?
Yes,
Okay, and it appeared to you, correct, from the end of the deposition, it wasn't quite finished?
correct,
right?
yes,
Okay, so we don't have the rest of it, but you have what we have so far.
I do.
And in the interview, there's that 3-page segment, which you read earlier and we talked about, where he's asking Mr. Cruz about the swastikas, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And there isn't really anywhere else in that interview where he's talking about the swastikas, correct?
so he talks to him a couple of times about it in the interview. Yes, about voices and also he talks about swaz.
Okay, but I'm talking about the drawing and displaying
The
of
actual,
swastikas.
yes, one time.
Okay, in that one part,
Yes.
correct? And in that 90-slide PowerPoint that you just reviewed, there was no mention of the swastikas that he drew and displayed,
Judge,
correct?
I'm going to object insofar as that doesn't mean anything. It's like a negative impeachment. I don't know how this witness could say, comment on another witness's PowerPoint that it means anything.
I didn't ask him if it meant anything, I just said it didn't appear in there. That's all I asked him, that's a factual question.
Overruled.
So, in my scanning of it, I didn't see any indications of it, yes.
Okay, and in the depo, and albeit it is incomplete, you did not see any mention of the swastikas,
Correct.
Object again, because that would be, was he asked? What's in a deposition depends on what you're asked.
Okay, overruled.
Okay. All right, let's talk about Dr. Zapp for a moment. Well, I'm sorry, let me back up. And again, we went over this, but Dr. Scott also opines that Mr. Cruz has antisocial personality disorder.
Correct. Among other conditions, yes.
Okay. Dr. Zapp also believes that he meets the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that you reviewed her depositions, correct?
Did.
Okay. She doesn't mention that as a reason for her diagnosis, correct?
Objection, negative impeachment.
That's sustained.
Okay. Do you recall swastikas appearing in her deposition?
So, as best as I can remember, I don't remember an example of it.
Okay. Now, do you recall reading through where she was asked about each one of the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality
I
disorder?
do.
Okay. And do you recall in her deposition her saying that there was, and she says this numerous times, plenty of collateral information that confirms each of the diagnostic criteria?
Yes.
Okay. And you would agree with that also based on your previous testimony, correct?
I'd say there's plenty of data inclusive of everything I reviewed, including social media, yes. Especially since I didn't see him.
Okay. And Dr. Robert Denny, he also opines that Mr. Cruz meets the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you reviewed his depositions, correct?
Yes,
And his interview,
I
correct?
did. I saw his interview, yes. And read it, both, yes.
Okay. He doesn't, in the interview with Mr. Cruz, he doesn't talk about the swastikas at all, correct?
Correct, that's my memory.
Okay. And he doesn't mention them at all in the depositions either, correct?
So not that I remember. I remember there was a lot of information in his deposition, but not that I remember. I didn't review those again for the purposes of this hearing.
Okay. So just give me a second. Just with respect to the 3 pieces of evidence, the drawing of the swastikas on the boot that we saw earlier, the magazine, and the backpack. would you have diagnosed Mr. Cruz with antisocial personality without those three things?
So without those three things, you're talking about with the inclusion of all the other social media, like searches for, you're talking about just the exclusion of that limited amount of information you said, but still I'd have the
Yes.
searches for Nazi Germany and those other kinds of things.
Yes.
So likely, yes, it just adds incrementally that his drawing and display of those is consistent with everything else. So likely, yes, but that would add to the strength of my opinion.
Okay. But it isn't essential to it.
Well, the way we diagnose in terms of psychology is that we accumulate behavioral samples, information. That's a behavioral sample. And the more that we have that's consistent with what we're looking at from a diagnostic perspective, the more confidence that we have in that diagnosis. So that would add, the inclusion of what you said, that limited scope would add to my confidence in terms of my diagnosis.
Okay, right. But what I'm asking you is, and you said before, I believe, if that had not been there, if that did not exist, you would have still had the same diagnosis.
Yes.
Okay. And I just want to go back real quick because you mentioned something about him watching Holocaust videos. And in fact, if you're watching a real life video, then that would be illegal. Did you see that in his social media?
So I saw he searched for that. I saw he searched for a lot of things. So if you have an interest in that, if you're watching that, it shows a disconnection with how people feel, how people react to those kinds of things, an interest in the most extreme and repulsive of behavior. And if you're actually watching those videos, then certainly that's not legal behavior that you're watching.
Okay, do you recall what the search was where he was searching for an actual video of someone being killed during the Holocaust?
Just that there was Nazi Germany and Holocaust searches. So I don't know what he saw. Those images didn't appear in the social media, what he saw, just what he searched for.
Right, I mean, did he search for actual videos of people being killed in the Holocaust?
One at a time, please.
So he was certainly searching for Nazi Germany and the events in Nazi Germany and Hitler, et cetera. So what exactly he was looking at, I don't know. That information wasn't provided.
Okay, but you do know what he was searching for.
Right.
No.
He was searching for Nazi Germany, Hitler, those type of things. Eva Braun, history of Hitler. And he had a great knowledge in his interview with Dr. Scott about Hitler. So he'd obviously done an extensive search.
Okay. Right, he had an extensive knowledge of the history of the Holocaust, correct?
And Hitler himself, and other historical figures, yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment? Sure. Okay. I want to ask before we get into the social media, and I don't know whether you actually had an opportunity to look at the state's motion, but there are some things in there that they're saying that the state is indicating it would like to present, and I don't know whether you have any information about this or not. So I'm just asking. Just give me 1 second. So one of the something that the state would like to present is testimony regarding the statements made by Mr. Cruz regarding his use and knowledge of the swastika and its relationship to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. Is that something you're going to testify about? Statements that he made?
Well, if I'm asked about social media, I mean, it was part of the basis of my opinion, so I'm asked about that, I certainly would. Yes, it's consistent with, the other things I've reviewed in this case and the diagnosis.
Okay, and I'm not talking about things he searched for. It's statements made by him regarding his use and knowledge of the swastika and its relationship to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. Are you aware, would you be testifying about statements that Mr. Cruz made? Not searches he did, but statements that he made.
Sure, what he said in the interviews themselves, that's what I would be testifying to.
Okay. Interviews that were done by Dr. Scott or Dr.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, another item of evidence is testimony explaining the meaning of the swastika to the defendant. Do you know whose testimony that's referring to? Or like who would be testifying about that? Is that you or someone else, or do you know?
Well, the only thing I can think of that I would testify to that is what he said in his interviews. So that would be the only thing I can think of. So I don't know if that's meant for me or someone else, but if you're asking me what I'd say what he said with Dr. Scott.
Okay.
And what he said with Dr. Holmes, too.
Okay, so, and if I'm reading this correctly, I mean, you obviously didn't explain to Mr. Cruz, you didn't meet with him, right?
Correct.
You didn't explain to him the meaning of the swastika, right?
Correct.
So, your best guess on this is the testimony or your testimony, if you were asked about it, would have to be, well, I observed in the interview Dr. Scott explaining something to him, correct?
Well, and he also researched and showed a knowledge that it was used as a hate symbol after initially it was a peace symbol, and the Nazis used that as a form of a hate symbol. So he showed an awareness of that. So he said that in his statement in his interview with Dr. Scott.
Right. But what I'm asking about is, would you be able to provide testimony regarding someone explaining to Mr. Cruz? Aside from what you saw in the interview or what you read in Dr. Holmes' deposition?
I can't provide anything more than the materials that I've had.
Okay.
I don't have any knowledge separate from that, in other words.
Okay. And I don't want to talk specifically about these things yet, but one of the items contained in the state's motion is testimony of Dr. Scott, Dr. Zapp, Dr. Denny, and Dr. Brannon in reference to swastikas, racist ideology, animal abuse, Nazism, hate speech, misogyny, and internet searches for mass killings and pornography, and their relationship to the defendant's mental condition as described below. I'm not entirely clear on what the mental condition is, but aside from what you testified to earlier in terms of those two mitigating circumstances, and what you testified to earlier regarding, I'm sorry, let me back up. And their relationship to the defendant's mental condition is described below. So does that, in your mind, apply to the antisocial personality diagnosis?
Sure. All those things you mentioned do, yes. All those categories, yes.
Right, but what I'm not talking about do those things apply. I'm saying does the phrase relationship to the defendant's mental condition as described, is that relationship to the defendant's mental condition, does that relate to a diagnosis of ASPD? Or is that something else?
So I didn't write it.
I know. I understand. If you can't,
I did review it. I did see it in advance, so I did see that.
Okay.
But certainly what I would say to that is it shows a lack of an active mental illness and the presence of an antisocial personality disorder based upon those pieces of information and others. Is the best way I can respond to that.
Okay, so in your mind, the relationship to the defendant's mental condition does apply to how it applies to antisocial mental condition.
Only from her deposition and her materials, but I've never spoken to her. So, I mean, I can talk about what she said. I can repeat what she said, but
Okay.
or what she did or didn't say. I mean, that's all I can do is rely on the information I have. So I can say what they said or didn't say in their depositions and in their statements and in their notes.
Okay, and I'm not asking you what they said, but I mean, do you recall them making comments with respect to Mr. Cruz's mental condition as it relates to swastikas?
No.
Okay, what about racist ideology?
No.
Okay, animal abuse?
I don't remember.
I'm sorry?
I don't remember on the last one.
Okay. Nazism?
I don't think so, but again, I didn't review those for the purposes of this hearing. I've read them, but I didn't review them for this.
Okay, I'm sorry, you read what?
I didn't review those documents again, so from my memory from before, I don't remember if that was mentioned or not.
Okay, hate speech?
I don't remember if that was in there or not.
Okay, misogyny?
I don't think so.
Internet searches for mass killings?
I don't remember.
Okay, and pornography?
Not that I remember.
Okay. And would the same apply to Dr. Denny?
Sure. Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't review those again.
Okay. You testified earlier that you are an expert in sex offenders,
I
correct?
am, yes.
Okay, so you would be aware then of sex offender research regarding child pornography offenders, correct?
There's a lot of it, so I'm a member of the Association for the Treatment and Prevention of Sexual Offending, so there's a lot. There's a journal that comes out every month with 10 or 11 new items in it, so that's covering a pretty broad range of research.
Okay, are you familiar with Dr. Michael Cito?
I am.
Okay. And are you aware that he does not believe that there is evidence to support that adolescent sexual offenders manifest antisocial behavior or are antisocial?
Yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment? Sure. Back to Dr. Cito.
Uh-huh.
So he says that there isn't evidence of a connection of adolescent sex offender in terms of viewing pornography and antisocial personality. However, there is an incidence of OCD and anxiety disorders in those individuals, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I want to go back to, and I know we've already went back on this twice, but you, I was reminded that you testified that something about Mr. Cruz watching videos of Jews going into a gas chamber.
So he showed interest in those type of things, and I said, if you're interested in those kinds of things, or viewing those kinds of things, that certainly would be outlier behavior that would show callous disregard for other people's emotions. I don't know what he was watching. They didn't have those specific videos there, so I couldn't track those and see what he was watching.
Right, but I mean, so are you saying that there are searches for gas chambers or people going into the gas chambers?
So no, but you'd be hard-pressed not to find that. If you're searching Nazi Germany and Hitler, that would be the materials that you would pull up to do an internet search for that. So again, if you're doing repeated searches, it would be awful difficult not to come upon that.
Right, and that would be in a history book about the Holocaust.
It wouldn't make
correct?
it any less awful, whether it was in a history book or a movie or a video. It wouldn't dampen the intensity of the repulsiveness of that particular image.
I agree with that, but what I'm saying is it could be also, there could be photos of that in a history book, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Same answer.
Possibly at the Holocaust Museum, correct?
Yes. Correct.
Okay. And people who read history books on this don't necessarily have antisocial personality. And I know that's not the sole reason, but I'm just saying, if we're thinking of it in terms of like the universe of people with ASPD and the universe of people that are interested in the history of the Holocaust, I mean, it's not like an overlapping circle, right?
If that's all they do, but if they're putting swastikas on their boots and on their assault rifles and also on other items and left for people to view, then that carries it beyond just a somewhat benign interest in Nazi Germany. It's the expression of behavior. It isn't just the interest in researching it. It's what you do as a result of that.
Right, and so do you have, okay, well, we can go back to the searches. I mean, do you know the dates that the swastikas were put on things?
So not offhand, he did tell Dr. Scott, he did tell him about a month before.
Okay, and that was the one on the, was that all of them, or the one on the magazine, or the boot, or do you remember?
I believe that was on the weapon, was a month before.
Okay, what about the backpack?
So I don't remember when that was on there. Along with the racial slur, I don't know when exactly he put those on there.
Okay, that was something he had while he was attending school at
Yes,
MSD, correct?
yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment?
Yes?
Sorry, I have a lot of paper up here. I just have a moment. I'm sorry. I misplaced something.
It's okay.
Would you agree with me, Doctor, that people use the internet to look up things that are antithetical to what they believe?
Depends on how often they look at them. So if they're antithetical, they don't have an obsession with them to continue to do it. So it amounts how many times they view it and how many variations of that they view. So certainly you'd say that someone could look at something on the, let's say, pornography. They could look at something on pornography, some variation of pornography, say, I don't like that, I don't want to see that anymore, and they wouldn't search it again. But a continual search shows more than something that they're not interested in, shows something they've remained interested in.
Right, but I mean, for example, during the election, somebody who was anti-Trump might have gone on the internet and done a ton of searches all throughout the election about him because of their intense dislike for him, correct?
So I guess you could create a scenario in which you would say that, but if they also search for other type of, let's say he's a Republican, so other things from the Republican Party, other Republican candidates, things that are related to his positions or people who he's nominated or brought onto the court, if you look at all of those things and show an interest in that and related topics, then that's more than just some opposite reaction to what you're viewing.
Okay. But I mean, people will look up things that are antithetical to what they believe.
They won't continue to look those things up and look for variations of those things. So if you continue to look for variations of it, it shows more than just an antithetical interest in it. It shows very genuine, sincere. And then if you discuss those things on social media as well, it shows even more of an interest in those areas.
Okay, and so I'm sorry, I want to go back to the swastika and the Nazism and all that. He looked up Hitler and the Holocaust and Eva Peron, and I mean, did he branch out to anything else about World War II or anything like that, or was it just those things?
Those things, and then using those symbols in a strategic way on a number of occasions, including at the time of the killing of 17 people.
Okay, and some of those things, though, may have occurred prior to looking this up, correct?
Sure, but the choice to use that weapon with that insignia on it and to leave it there at that time was well thought out.
Okay, and what evidence do you have of that?
What he said, his own words. He chose that weapon, he chose to inscribe that, and he chose to leave it there. So all of those things, that's a planned set of behaviors.
Right.
He didn't do that by accident. Those were all planned behaviors that he did. And he also said he did that for attention, to make sure people gave him attention, whether it was good or bad. So all of that is well thought out. It's not just researching Nazism, or it's not just researching swastikas. It's using that in your behavior. It's putting that out there into the world for an effect and anticipating the consequences of that.
Right, but him saying, I chose to leave it there, I mean, we don't know when he made that choice, right? I mean, we have no way of knowing that.
We just know that he built up to doing that he chose to leave something with that insignia on both sides of it, actually. He chose to do that along with a magazine, chose to do that for a number of reasons. One, so he wouldn't be detected when he was leaving, so he could escape, thinking through again.
Right,
but also, if I can just finish my answer, but also for the impact that other people would see when they saw that swastika. So there was dual purpose in terms of how he was using his brain at that time.
Right, but I mean, we don't actually know when he made that choice and why he chose to do that at that time. We don't know that.
We just know that he did it. We can't
We know
read
that
his
he did it.
mind.
Okay.
We can just know what he said and what he did, which is
Okay.
how psychology works in terms of giving opinions.
Okay. And would you agree with me that people sometimes create personas online, maybe that aren't in their own character?
Yes.
Okay. And would you also agree with me that people will sometimes act differently online than they do in real life?
Or they'll act more like their genuine self because they feel more of a license to do that. It's more of a protected atmosphere, so you can act more of who you really are instead of socially having to put on some masks or costumes.
Okay. I mean, it could go either way, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And would you agree with me that adolescents use the internet differently than middle-aged adults?
Yes.
Okay. May I have a moment? Sure. Mercifully, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we take like 5 minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. It's 2:54. We'll take a recess till 3:05. Dr. Brandon, you're welcome to stay seated or take a break as well.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. present. State, are you going to inquire?
Oh, did you finish? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Doctor, you were asked about how many cases you've had with swastikas involved, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let me first ask you, how many cases have you had where a person has called another voice swastika or swaz?
Never.
Never. That's a pretty unique thing, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so therefore, a person who calls himself Swazi or swastika and also has a history of using swastikas, you certainly haven't had that then as well, correct?
No, sir. That's correct.
Okay. When you were asked about other records and other, let's say, call them data points that you have, that you've looked at, I think you were asked about pharmacy records, perhaps. Was that one of them?
Yes.
Birth records?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
School records?
Yes.
Correct? Henderson records?
Correct.
Correct. So he had stopped going to Henderson about a year plus before the shooting, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
And so they're somewhat dated from the massacre on Valentine's Day 2018, correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, and certainly the birth records, his birth records, are very dated in terms of antisocial personality diagnosis, correct?
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
correct.
You can't use his birth records to diagnose antisocial personality, correct?
Correct.
Okay. His pharmacy records were also dated as well,
They were.
and his school records, there was something up until he was at Stoneman Douglas a year before the shooting, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Where a lot of activities happened relevant to misbehaviors of the defendant about a year and a half to a year before the shooting, correct?
Correct.
And then he went to an off-campus learning center after that.
Yes.
And those were minimal records regarding antisocial personality, correct?
Yes, sir. There weren't minimal records, but in terms of being able to diagnose that, correct. It was minimal after that time.
Okay. Compare that to the social media records that we went over this morning in terms of the timing of those records, which is more chronologically related to the defendant at the time of the shooting.
Well, the social media records, they're voluminous and they're different types from both, searches to actual text messages to videos to display of pictures. It gives you a window again into his brain, into his mindset during this period of time leading up to February 14th of 2018. So it's the best, again, example of unbiased, unfettered, exposure of what he was interested in, what he was thinking about, and what he was gravitating towards at those times.
Okay. When you look at data sources to give you confidence about a diagnosis, do you cherry pick the data that you want to use?
No, sir. The forensic standard is actually the opposite. So we're to consider all of those things, to be transparent about what we reviewed, to avoid something called confirmation bias. So we're supposed to look at everything and then pull together what's the commonalities between all of those and get some frame of reference, if we can, to make a diagnosis based on those materials.
Okay, so you just don't look at a swastika that he was wearing on his backpack alone if you have other data, correct?
No, sir. You'd look at what the person might have said about that, what they did as a result of that. Did they continue to do that? Did they use those symbols in some way? So all of those things, where and how did they use those symbols? And what did they say was the reason why they used those symbols? So it isn't just the isolated, interest in a swastika or the drawing of a swastika. It's the context. It's everything that surrounds that.
And speaking of surround that, so we went over, although we skipped a number of pages, but over 60 pages of postings, research, things like that in that exhibit that actually originated from the defense motion D MIL 10, correct?
Yes, sir. I just gave a small sampling of what was in there.
Okay. And it wasn't just Hitler, correct?
Correct?
And when you were asked the questions on cross-examination about, well, you can, I'm not quoting it exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but you might have an antithetical interest in Hitler, but it's not really you, correct?
Correct.
That was the question that was asked?
Yes.
Okay. And how about if there's also searches on other mass killers?
Correct.
And how about if there's, in how they did their killings, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how long it takes the police to respond to a shooting, correct?
Yes.
That's one of his searches as well, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And there's cut up animals in that collection of social media, correct?
Yes, sir, there is.
There is tremendous amount of hatred towards women expressed, correct?
Correct.
And of course, there's tremendous amount of racist statements about killing black people, correct?
Correct. Yes.
But black people wasn't the word that was often used, correct?
Correct.
You were asked about the research by a particular person about pornography, correct?
Dr. Michael Cito, yes.
Okay. That research cited is for internet searches, not murderers, correct?
Correct. It's isolated to just that interest in pornography. So it's really, that's what happens in research, especially research with great researchers like Cito, is they isolate variables to be able to make extrapolations from.
Okay. Is there a connection between the viewing of pornography and antisocial personality disorder?
Sure, yes.
And what is that?
So it's, again, a violation of social norms, and the more extreme it is, the more likely it is to be attached to that disengagement, if you will, from what people would usually look at, the social norm or social culture would find acceptable. So the more extreme your searches are for pornography, the more likely you are to have antisocial personality traits or the disorder itself. In other words, you're taking pleasurable interest in extremities of sexual behavior, oftentimes, like, for instance, rape porn. That would be a good example of it. So those type of things,
What was the word you used?
rape porn.
Oh,
So that was one of the searches. So if those type of things and others are being searched, you're more likely to have that as a consistency with antisocial personality disorder.
When you put on a backpack with a swastika and the fuck ends on it, is that assuming a persona on social media, or is that actually doing it?
That's doing it in real life, which is different from being in media. That's actually playing that out in real life for other people to see and react to.
So that's not just assuming a persona on the internet and it's not really him?
Correct.
You talked about diffusing responsibility for the swastikas.
Yes, sir.
Do you still have in front of you the 3-1-22 between Dr. Scott and Mr. Cruz?
Yes.
If you go to page 372, line 15.
Yes, sir.
Is this an example of diffusion when the defendant says, and then someone told me I had a swastika on my boot? And then you said, I did do that, but that was for attention?
Sure, it's that blaming, it's that it's not me, somebody else made me, forced me to do this. If they hadn't have done this or that, I wouldn't have done that, or that wouldn't have happened. So that's very consistent with antisocial personality disorder. It's not me, it's somebody else that's caused this or done this.
Someone told me I had a swastika on my boot, but I did it?
Yes, sir?
That doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, but it makes sense in terms of an interview in which you're measuring your responses on the person who's interviewing you. So if you're attempting to feign or malinger, it does make sense, Mr. Marcus, in terms of trying that out to see if that works, and if not, to adapt your strategy to something different, like a different kind of voice.
So when you're diagnosing antisocial personality, you're not looking at one element, one data point of swastika. You're looking at animal abuse, hating women, wanting to kill black people, all these things together?
Yes, sir, because there's a line through all of those. So the line through all that is abhorrent behavior, hateful, reprehensible behavior at its extremities, depersonalizing other people. So there's a line that runs through that that's consistent with antisocial personality disorder. So if you pull them apart and say someone might have some interest in some topic, that's true, but not when the scope is generalized to those same type of qualities in what you look at, the things that you review.
And don't all of those things demonstrate a persuasive, not a persuasive, a persistent pattern of behavior on the part of the defendant?
Yes, sir, it does.
That's consistent with antisocial personality?
That would be my opinion, yes, sir.
And those were his words, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
May I ask just a couple of questions in my class?
Like what?
Well, Mr. Marcus was suggesting that the records that I referred to that Dr. Graham had to use were older, and I just want to ask about diagnosing people. The requirement is that they be 18 years of age. I just want to ask how you go about diagnosing someone who's, say, 18 and a half, or something like that.
I thought the cutoff was 15.
No, 15 is for conduct disorders, one of the prerequisites, but
All right, I'll allow you to ask about that limited topic.
sorry. Guess you already know what I'm going to ask, right? Okay, so obviously one of the prerequisites is a evidence of conduct disorder, right?
Yes.
And for someone then who is 18 and a half years old, 19 years old, you would use old records, correct?
Good, yes.
Okay. Can you make a diagnosis on someone who's, say, 18 in a month?
So you could if you had sufficient data. So it would depend on what you have. So sometimes you just can't make that diagnosis. So you'd say rule out or provisional or something like that. So it depends on the data you had.
Okay, so if you have sufficient data from somebody from a very young age all the way up until they're 18 in 1 month, you can, if all of the other prerequisites are met, you can make an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis.
So if that's all that's there, but if there's other examples like attention deficit disorder or learning disabilities or something like that, you need more data to do a differential diagnosis. So if it's that clean, where that's the only thing you're trying to determine, antisocial or not, then yeah, you probably could. But here in this case, we have multiple competing diagnoses that we're looking at and trying to rule in or rule out. So it makes the diagnostic picture more difficult, so more data is really required.
Right, I understand that, but I'm saying that the more data, what you're talking about, can be data of incidents or things.
No, ma'am. The defense is resting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, argument, state. Your motion?
Judge, I would like to ask if we can, rather than making oral argument now, if we can submit to the court like a hearing memo. This is very complicated. This is psychological stuff. We're not doctors, we're lawyers. We'll have a transcript
Sure.
of this, I think.
Is that okay with you, State?
We did provide memos already.
You don't have to do it. If you would rather, let me put it this way. I won't rule today if one side or the other would prefer to make a written closing or not, or just stand on the written pleadings, that's fine. If one side or another would prefer to do to present oral argument, that's also fine. How about that?
Okay. I would prefer to do it in writing.
Okay. And how long do you need to? I mean, I don't need necessarily make this ruling for quite some time because the state's only asking to introduce it in rebuttal. So, I mean, I'd rather do it sooner than later while it's fresh in my mind, but I don't think there's a rush on an order.
That's fine, Your Honor. I would like to just make a short closing.
Sure.
And this would be very short, Your Honor. The points that the state was trying to bring is that this would be a rebuttal to defense bringing forth mental mitigation evidence. And it's in various different areas that this comes across. In not only the antisocial personality, that's a competing diagnosis. It's opposite to what the defense claim is going to be. It shows that he in fact doesn't have a mental illness. He has a behavioral issue. That completely competing to what the defense theory is. The defense is asking the state to tie an arm behind its back, don't present all your evidence of it. They're not, make no mistake, the defense is not agreeing to antisocial personality. They're going to fight it tooth and nail, and any less evidence they have to compete against makes their argument stronger. This is legitimate rebuttal evidence showing antisocial personality. It's a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. Everything that the court has seen about this social media is a pervasive pattern of disregard for the violation of others. It's like a definition that it should be a picture in a dictionary, everything that we have of what antisocial personality is. But it's also in rebuttal of intellectual disability, which is a claim going to be made by the defense. At least they've said that that is going to be a claim of theirs, in that all his researching that was done. Very important is the malingering aspect and swastika. So the defense never moved to exclude swastika. The person, the voice that he hears, they didn't move to exclude swastika, that voice that he hears. That opens the door to everything, not that that's the only thing that opens the door, but the fact that he calls himself swastika, which of course his own expert says is nonsense, but that's what he claims. And it just so happens swastika is very much a part of his life, and he brings a gun with a swastika for a magazine, and he has it on his boot. And he calls himself swastika. That doesn't open the door to swastikas? Of course it does. And then the statutory mitigators, all of this social media, when we brought up, as Dr. Brandon brought out, rebuts the statutory mitigators as well. It's a full picture. It's certainly not a pretty picture. It's a very ugly picture, but that's who this defendant is. And if they bring his mental mitigation into evidence, then they have to accept the other evidence which the state submits is properly admitted in rebuttal. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Curtis, how long do you need to submit your written supplement?
Assuming that I get the transcript, I think Ms. Bailey said she could even have it later today, but I don't need it later today, maybe tomorrow. I could probably have it by like Tuesday of next week.
Sure, or even Friday would be fine, okay?
All right, thank you.
Also, while I am thinking of it, I received the defense motion in limine for redactions of the defendant's statement, which is DMIL 11. And I've gone through it, and I just wanted to point out that there are portions of the statement that I can see have been highlighted. They don't come through in color on my end, but I can still see them. But they're not listed in the paragraphs. In other words, a lot of the paragraphs a lot of the A, B, C are also highlighted, because I went to highlight them myself, and I realized you had already done that, which is great. But there are a number of portions that are highlighted, but they're not listed in the body of your motion, so I didn't know if those were mistakenly left in, or if you mistakenly didn't mention them. And I can tell you exactly what the sections I'm talking about.
Judge, the highlighted portion, the yellow was that you.
I
can't remember
we
now.
don't
It's
have.
either disagreements or green as agreements. I can't remember exactly. I can provide the court a color copy tomorrow morning. The reason why they're not listed.
Is because they don't have anything to do with me.
No, they'll have to do. They will. They do have to do with
The
you.
portions that you disagreed on and you want me to consider, you listed in this motion,
Correct.
paragraph by paragraph. But in addition to all of these that are listed, there are other parts that are also highlighted that if you're not asking me to consider, I'm wondering, did you forget to mention them? Or did you accidentally leave them highlighted? Do you see what I'm saying?
It's a possibility. I will look at it again.
Okay.
And I can bring you a color copy tomorrow. If that's better.
Do you want me to tell you what I found? Now, this might not be everything, but specifically, do you want me to print a copy of this? I realize I thought this was sort of just housekeeping. I'm not going to rule on it. I just want to make sure that I have the right motion. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
In other words, that the transcript matches the body of the motion.
There was quite a few changes, so I.
That's okay. All right, so you have highlighted page 74, line 4, I'm sorry, page 174, line 14, but you did not include that in the body of your motion.
Okay.
Okay, you have highlighted page 185, lines 4 through 16. But in the body of your motion, it only has lines 4 and 5. Okay, and then page 186, lines 2 through 5 is also highlighted but not listed in the body of the motion. Wait a minute. Okay. So paragraph 4, I believe, lists the portions of the statement that are in contention as to whether they come in or out. Is that correct?
I have the motion right here.
It says the
Yes.
defense is requesting to redact the following statements which the state is not in agreement with. So what I want to make sure is that I have all of the statements that you're not agreeing to and that I know. And the other thing I wanted to ask is that in reviewing the transcript, there were a couple of portions that are in contention that I believe it would be useful for me to have the actual statement so that I can hear how the words are spoken, as in addition to the transcript. So if one or both sides can provide me with, I don't know how you guys do it now, a zip drive, the actual video, because I'm reading it and it's there's a couple portions to me that would be easier to make the decision if I can hear how the words are spoken as opposed to just read the words on the paper.
Sure, I'll bring you a drive tomorrow.
Okay. Is there anything else that we have for today, and what's the plan for the rest of the week?
Judge, I think
the motion we were just discussing, if the defense could file a revised one today or tomorrow and Friday, I think the easiest thing to do, just kind of go through like the photos, and we can go through the lines and make our arguments, agree or disagree, and the court can rule right there, rather than the state filing a response and then sending it.
You mean as far as their motion limiting for redactions?
Yes.
It's not a lot of information. It's first of all, if the transcript they gave me is just left in a few highlighted areas, it makes it even smaller. If you all want to make argument, you can, but I'm perfectly happy reviewing this. I think most of it is
Okay, then if we don't need a hearing, that's fine.
pretty.
I just haven't had a chance to look at it, and now that I'm hearing that there's issues with the consistency, I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing as well.
Okay.
Maybe we can just all agree to it, I don't know.
I can amend it, I can look into
Well, you
this.
may not have to. You may just say, you know what, the highlighted one that I gave you has a few areas that shouldn't have been included.
That's what I think actually was the problem.
So,
I'll let the state know then.
okay, well, what about this long hearing that you all told me you need a week for? When are we starting that?
I'm glad you brought that up, Judge, and I think Mr. Secor can speak on behalf of the defense with respect to their witnesses. My understanding is one witness is available on the 13th of July and the other one on the 28th. As the court knows, it is the defense's burden to go first. The state is not a problem putting one or two witnesses out of turn, but to put our entire case on before the defense is problematic for a lot of reasons. It's essentially defeats the purpose of them having the burden. So I've looked at the court schedule every day that we don't have court, or we're not in session with the jury, and managed to get a schedule together. I will have a witness for next week. We'll have Dr. Avery, Mr. Secor, who I believe is scheduled for the 13th.
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you guys schedule for the 13th? Was that the only day you could do?
This is from the defense, Judge. I'm just trying to work around the availability of what I was told over the weekend with regard to their experts.
Your expert can't come on the 12th or the 11th or the 12th? Oh, no, not the 11th. Hold on, let me get a calendar. Okay, the 13th is a Wednesday.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
perfect. And you have one expert that's going to be testifying?
One expert on the 13th and one expert on the 28th and the 29th if necessary. And I think you have somebody for the 28th as well?
I can have someone on the 29th, and I would have the remaining on the 4th, which is a day that the court does not have us in session. And the remaining experts will be either next week or I believe we're also off on the 19th of July.
Okay, so what about July 11th and 12th?
One witness available July 11th. I was prepared to start our case next week, but because of the defense's issues, I'm trying to work around. So we can take one witness out of order in terms of the defense having to go first. So that witness would be for us on the 11th, the defense on the 13th, and then I can finish the 29th and the 4th.
Let me start with you, Mr. Secor. How many witnesses do you have that you're going to call?
2.
And one is available on July 13th,
Yes, ma'am.
and the other?
On the 28th and the 29th. Hopefully won't need the 29th, but he will be available both days if need be.
Okay, and state your witness is available on July 11th.
Correct.
And then, I'm sorry, state how many witnesses do you have?
5.
And your witness, only one is available on the 11th?
That's correct, Judge.
And when are the others available?
I have one available for, I can do the 19th, I can do the 29th, and the 4th.
you have 5 witnesses.
Correct. I would prefer they all be after Dr. Adler, who's the defense expert, but if the court prefers to have one more between his testimony, then I will put someone on the 19th.
July 19th,
Yes, Judge.
so that's a Tuesday. Is that acceptable to the defense?
Yes, ma'am.
July 19th,
Yes, ma'am. Is the
Tammy?
opening to the 18th?
that's okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up.
I
All right, July 11th is state witness, and then July 13th, defense witness,
Yes, ma'am.
and then July 19th is state witness?
Yes, Judge. If the court does, like I said, I prefer that witness be after Dr. Adler, but if that's not the court's pleasure, then I will put this
And when
witness
can
on.
Dr. Adler testify?
He's the one that's available the 28th and the 29th.
I think none of your experts are available any earlier?
For me, I've got several people out of the country next week for whatever reason.
What about the following week?
And then we're starting trial.
But we have,
I just worked with the days that the court had off on the most recent schedule.
so state, you're putting on 1 witness on July 11th?
Correct.
And 1 witness on July 19th, and when are the other 3?
The 29th and the 4th.
Okay, the 29th is not gonna work.
Okay.
So is there any way that we need to make this more fluid?
I can tell the court, I'm almost 100% sure all of my witnesses are available the first week of August. I
That's in like 4 weeks. What do these people do for a living? I mean, do they work for the President of the United States? What, I don't understand.
it's vacations, conferences, they teach, they have
And this doesn't take priority, it's trial. I mean, I'm sure when they're hired, they're not told that you're gonna have an exact date that you can come, and, I mean, that's not how it works.
Understood, and like I said, we were prepared to start next week, but being told that we're contingent on when the defense experts are available.
And Judge, just as a reminder, and I just bring this up because I agree, the way that it's laying out now is not ideal, but we're the witnesses that were here and present to testify.
I understand that's what you told me, but the lawyers and the state said this, and you all didn't say any differently, said that there would likely not be any testimony on that, whatever day that was, Monday. So I was obviously the last to know. Had I known, I would never have canceled court. I mean, the state said, we're not gonna have anything on Monday, and then you all didn't say anything.
And I wasn't suggesting it was Your Honor's fault by any means. I'm just saying that because the jury selection process ended up lasting longer than I think anybody expected, that's what happened.
Okay, and why can't your witness come before the 28th?
He's out of the country. He was here for 3 days and then is out of the country.
Until the 28th?
I'm not sure what day he comes back. He comes back the 15th, but he lives in Seattle and has to return to his practice before he can get here.
Okay, so is he testifying via Zoom?
No, he has a flight to be present.
Folks, I can't allow this. This is too spread out. Your witnesses are gonna have to make themselves available. Wait, state, your experts are gone for the whole month?
No, Judge, I just was trying to work out.
All right, I forgot. If your witness gets back on the 15th, he can't come earlier than the 28th?
My understanding is that he's out of the country working and has to return to his practice in Seattle before he can come here. And he has a flight currently to come here on the 27th.
How about the 19th? Guys, we have to do better than this. Having witnesses spread out through the entire month of July and then part of August, it's not going to work. This is piecemeal. And I'm sorry to say this, but both sides, your witnesses are gonna have to make themselves more available to the court. I mean, what happens when it's time for them to testify? You're gonna tell me to take a 3-week break because they're out of town? I mean, we're not gonna know when they're gonna testify. This trial's been postponed. I mean, expert witnesses are hired for the purpose of court testimony. They have to be flexible. There are some judges in civil that would say, too bad, have them here tomorrow morning or they're not testifying. And I don't wanna be like that, but this is too,
Judge, I don't know if this helps the court at all. I had sent Ms. McNeil a stipulation. We can still start on the 18th and the state can put on their case, so we won't be delayed in that regard. We don't have to wait for the rulings on this. I sent Ms. McNeil a stipulation about just things that will not be mentioned in openings because this Dabo presentation is for purposes of rebuttal. So we can keep moving. And I agree, I don't think it should be
I would
staggered.
much rather take a week off between the state's case and the defense case and hear this motion than to hear it piecemeal throughout all of these different days. And also, again, when it's time for your experts to testify at trial, I'm not going to be able to give you all, oh, sorry, he's out of town and he's got to come back to his practice or he's out of the country for 3 weeks. That's not going to work. I mean, these people are professionals. I assume they make at least part of their living on court appearances, and they've got to be more flexible than giving 3 weeks notice.
That's fine because we.
I mean, we're more than happy to discuss with our experts about trying to figure out.
But they're going to have to be flexible again, though, because we don't know. But rather than have July 12th, July 11th, July 19th, all these dates, it's going to be, I can compartmentalize, that's not a problem, but this is really stretching it.
I couldn't agree more. I do think it's a little bit of a nightmare to think of it over the course of such a long period of time. And I do personally prefer the idea of finding a week between the state's case and the defense case when we could do it in its entirety. All I can say is that's going to take some time for us to talk to different people and try to work it out. I also just want to say that they do have to be flexible to some degree, but I just want to reiterate it's not all them because they were here. They did make the effort to come here.
But they must have just told you they were coming less than a week before because you all didn't know the last time we were in session that they were going to be here. Or you would have told me, no, Judge, we have our witness on, I don't remember if it was a Monday or a Tuesday where I canceled because I thought we weren't going to have anything to do. So they must have just told you, right? The week before, the Thursday before, whatever day we were in court. I asked I wanted everyone to be set from, somebody help me out with that date. Was it Monday?
Judge, it was the 27th, and I was the one that stood up the week before and said I suggested that we wrap up the other outstanding motions outside
Right.
the hour with the understanding that we could start the full day on the 29th.
And my point is that the defense didn't say anything, so they must have only told you as of no, it wasn't a Wednesday.
It was a Thursday, it was after we finished general voir dire, Your Honor, and.
It was June 27th. We finished general voir dire on the 23rd. On the 23rd, I asked what was going to be ready for the 27th. The state said, we don't have anything, and I said, that's not good enough, and nobody said anything. So that's when I canceled. Well, I didn't cancel that day, but I thought about it over the weekend, and I didn't want to sit here with, time wasted. So what I'm saying is, your expert's only giving you a few days' notice. Why do you have to give him more than a few days?
Well, I think that, and I will certainly take responsibility for that I mean, he came that weekend, and I spent a lot of time with him.
Right, but the Thursday before that, you didn't even know he was coming.
No, I did, I'm just saying,
Oh, you all missed it, sorry, but
Yeah.
it was discussed. That's the only reason I canceled. I didn't want to sit here with nothing to do. And I'm
understand.
sorry, maybe it was late and you didn't hear.
No, and there's a lot going on, and I'm in no way standing here trying to blame Your Honor at all. The jury selection process went long, and that was very necessary that it take the time that it took. So I apologize that I didn't make it more clear that he was available that week. I just wanted to make it clear that if it's anybody's fault, it's mine. It's not
Right,
his.
it's, no, we don't, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll take the blame for this. But that still doesn't get us anywhere, so, my suggestion would be perhaps, Labor Day is on the 5th. Perhaps taking that week off and giving the jury that week off and having this hearing from the 6th to the 9th. And even if the state is not completely finished, we could take a break to do the motion then, so it's more fluid. I was just thinking that might help some jurors out because they might have a plan.
Judge, you mean in September?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about in between your case and the defense case.
I don't think our case is gonna take that long.
Okay, so can we pick a week when you may not be finished? You may or may not be finished, but but it doesn't leave any downtime? Like what week do you suggest? The 22nd, I mean, keep in mind, I'm looking at the calendar, we're starting on the 18th, but then the 19th we're off for reasons that are outside of everyone's control, and then there's a half day only on the, I believe, the, correct. So,
Just can you go sideways real quick? Because I just don't want to put this on.
sure.
attorney is from out of state.
The attorney for who, the witness?
The
To
lawyer.
the lawyer, yeah, for two
The attorney for
witnesses.
the lawyer?
Yes, they live in Virginia. I'm
The
sorry.
witness is lawyers.
What did I say?
Attorney's lawyer.
I'm
The
sorry.
witness is a lawyer and they have a lawyer? No.
No, I'm sorry. Can someone tell the story, because I can't get it straight.
The witnesses live in Virginia, and their counsel is in Virginia as well, and the state has filed a motion to compel answers of those witnesses, and we just need to work, the state must
Thank you, Mrs.
work with the Virginia lawyers together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We
Let the
haven't,
Virginia lawyer know that this case takes precedent.
we haven't
Please.
reached out to them yet as to, can I just ask a question, would the court allow a Zoom hearing?
Sure.
Okay, or a telephone hearing, or whatever you want.
Whose witness is it?
It's
Obviously.
It's two defense witnesses, the defendant's brother and the person he lives with. And so they live in Virginia, and there was a dispute over questions that were asked. And so that's why I filed a motion, but I just want to arrange for the hearing if the court wants to give me a date to propose.
Tomorrow? Friday? What jurisdiction do
we'll
I
tell
have
Friday.
over a witness if they're physically in Virginia and their attorney, and how can their attorney without filing a
They did.
Bohog Beach, they
They
did?
did. We'll send, the court would like to do it Friday if they can do it.
And we have other motions that can be heard tomorrow. I don't know where Mr. Seafold is.
Do you all want to give me a rundown so that I can be
Yes,
prepared?
Judge. The defense has filed a pretrial motion for determination of the admissibility of certain photographs and video, Casey.
Sorry.
And Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Secor are prepared to argue that tomorrow.
Okay, do you all want to, how many photographs and video evidence is it? How much?
450.
Excuse me?
450 judge.
450 photos that are in dispute? Is that yes?
Yes, sir.
And then there's a video?
That includes the video.
Okay. Would it benefit,
We haven't seen that motion.
Yeah,
It's
that's
being
the
filed
first
this
that was
afternoon.
filed,
When?
that you sat down to talk.
Oh, okay, all right.
would it help, do you think it would be helpful for me to look at the photos ahead of time or no?
That's the court's preference.
I mean, I don't know what they are. Are they, they're autopsy type photos or?
Crime scene photos, autopsy photos, surveillance video.
If you have those available, at least I can be familiar with them and maybe we can mark them today to expedite the process. Is that, do you have them on a zip drive or something? And
There's no point trying to, they won't object to every single one. They just completely waste of time. They have no intention of agreeing.
I thought that's why we met.
So we did in fact meet with the state Thursday.
Yeah, we went,
We met with the state, they showed us some videos. The photos were not provided to us. They did some cropping to try and minimize some of the gruesomeness.
okay,
We didn't get those until Friday afternoon. So we didn't have all of the information. What we had was some photo numbers, and we didn't know what the photos belonged to. So we had to pull all of the photos to determine what the photos were, and then to go through each of them to make arguments. What we did see at the state attorney's office is individual videos that they have made for each victim.
okay.
And we have reviewed those and we're prepared to make arguments on those, but we didn't have access to the photographs yesterday. We just got a list with numbers on, or Thursday, a list with the numbers of the photos they intend to move into evidence, and we had to go through each of them.
So how many photos are you intending to move into evidence? More than 450?
more than what?
More than 450? That's how many they're objecting to.
I think that's about all we showed.
So you're objecting to all of the photos?
There are some photos that are, for instance, a screenshot from Google Maps, things like that we will not be objecting to. And I can make a list identifying all the ones that there are no issues for.
So you're objecting to all of the photos of the crime scene, so to speak, as well as the various decedents in a way that somebody would object to someone's fingerprints getting rolled, like just for the sake of objecting, or in other words, you're not agreeing to the photos any photos being put in, so you're objecting to all of them?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if it's like, sometimes, for example, if there's a decedent and there's the same picture of depicting the same wound and one is a blown up version of the other, the courts will rule that you don't need to show both, state which one do you want to show, and that type of a thing, or is it just a across-the-board objection to crime scene photos in general?
Well, so there's different objection for different things.
Okay.
Using the autopsy example, it's the defense's position that the cause and manner of death are no longer relevant because the defendant has in fact admitted that he caused the death of these particular individuals.
Okay.
Now, if the court finds some relevancy, and just for the sake of this conversation, let's say victim A, there's 5 photos.
Okay.
That the state wants to admit. If you believe that they're still relevant over our objection, then we would maintain our objection, but we may say, of those 5,
You have
we
an
think 3 are cumulative.
Got it.
So it's kind of layered.
Got
And
it.
in the crime scene photos, there's same kind of, mostly cumulative. I'll have to defer to them for further
Okay.
arguments. So, and prejudicial, this gruesomeness.
I understand.
Your Honor, just to put this in, if you don't mind if I say.
No, I don't mind.
Your Honor, just to put this in context, the defense months and months and months ago filed motions regarding the applicability of each of the aggravating factors that the state put the defense on notice on. And among those was heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And this court ruled that that aggravating factor applied in this case. And that aggravating factor, the state alleged in its notice, applied to each of the 17 victims in this case.
So your position is going to be that the photographs are relevant to show heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and the defense is going to say that they're not relevant because he's already admitted guilt.
It puts it in its context, Your Honor, to show the point of injury, the entrance wounds, the exit wounds, the damage, the harm that were done to these children and adults. And this is a penalty phase. Yes, the defendant has pleaded guilty, but this is a penalty phase. And heinous, atrocious, and cruel is an aggravating factor that you have already ruled is applicable to this case. And it is the state's burden to prove an aggravating factor in order to make the defendant eligible for the death penalty in the eyes of the jury. This is necessary.
I understand, and your position is that they can prove it another way, and that's why you want a hearing tomorrow.
Yes, there's several different arguments, and I understand that the court needs to make an evaluation as to whether or not a particular photograph belongs. It's necessary to prove half. We understand that, but we would like to make arguments on those.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Is the format that you have the photographs saved? In other words, if I were to review the photos tonight, would there be any way that I could distinguish between decedents, or in other words, will I be able to tell 1 through 5 is this particular individual, 6 through 10 is this particular, or are they just, am I not going to be able to, is there any use of my time to view them in advance?
In my opinion, you could review the videos, the individual videos that the state made for representing each victim, because it says their name,
Okay.
you would know, and the file is labeled by their name.
Okay.
The state provided us with a list of all the photos, but they didn't identify the photos, and...
In other words, if I can't make heads or tails of what I'm looking at without guidance from the lawyers, I don't know if there's any
Well,
point.
if you can give us, till Monday maybe, we can put it in files that you can understand, like we could put one victim, and all the photographs we want for that victim.
Okay,
But, you know,
but weren't you asking to have this hearing tomorrow?
Yes, Judge, Mr. Secor spent the majority of his weekend reviewing all those photographs and preparing for the hearing.
Okay,
Would
so,
like to hear tomorrow.
this is what I would ask that you do, please. If you can group the photos, in other words, 1 through 10 is argument A. you see what I'm saying?
Before tomorrow?
Well, you wanna have a hearing tomorrow, right?
Right, but
In other words, you all have seen the photos, you all know the intimate details of the crime. I don't. So when you hand me 450 photos, I want to know how am I going to be able to, for lack of a better way of saying it, compartmentalize to know, you know, your argument is to all 450, and this is the argument. But then 1 through 10, you're making this argument. You know what I mean?
yes.
Your Honor, we're not gonna be ready to do that tomorrow.
Judge, our assistant has been ill. I think he'll be back tomorrow. He's the one who would provide all the audio visual
Right.
of this. So, and to print out the photos is exceptionally slow. It takes some time to actually print them out.
Just give us till Monday and we'll have it.
Your Honor, the defense has identified all of the photographs after we went through them for the last 5 days, and we can show you the photographs on the screen.
Yeah, but we're not prepared to do that.
How about the videos?
The videos we can.
And you have the videos on a zip drive?
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to know, let's make a plan for the rest of the days that we have open, please. So that I know what to expect, that I can review things in advance. So for tomorrow, the defense motion in limine regarding victim decedent videos.
If you want to do that, yes, because those are labeled and we have them on a disc for you. You want to review those?
Is that the videos that you said you could?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so there's 17.
I think there's actually a couple more, but they're all labeled, so you will know.
You're
Okay.
just talking about the school surveillance, right?
Yeah, the ones you guys made.
The videos, Your Honor, are of victims who died in the hallways because there was no cameras inside the classroom. So there are not 17 of them. There are ones pertaining to the decedents in the hallways and one just outside of the building.
Okay, but they're marked, and you're going to give me the digital
Yes, ma'am.
evidence.
Yes, ma'am.
What else can we do for tomorrow that's outstanding? So I'm gonna make a list. We're gonna do the motion in limine regarding the videos. We're going to handle the clarification of the redactions of the defendant's statement.
Yes,
Your Honor, since
Yes.
I'm missing something. What's their objections to the videos so we can prepare? I mean, they're not relevant or what?
I don't know.
Well, I can tell you now, Mr. Sets, that the basis for most of the video objections that we have are that they're cumulative, and when you have one for each victim. in other
Right.
words.
And
And so
we don't, but
you have the same basically camera view of the.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Okay. So,
Okay, that's your objection?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we can handle that tomorrow.
Okay, so the objection to the videos, and Mr. Wheeler, you said, do you have a zip drive?
I do, Judge. I'm just clearing out the photographs in
Sure.
your orders.
Or I just won't look at those if you want, but I think you should mark it and put it in an envelope so that it's documented, so that it doesn't.
Judge, I'll allow the state to review it first.
And all the photographs are on there too, Judge.
No,
I don't think you need to delete them, Mr. Wheeler, I just won't look at them, and if I can't make heads or tails of what is what on my own, there's no reason for me to look at them in advance. Okay, we're going to address the clarification of the defendant's statement and the redactions. What else?
maybe we can email the court in a little bit. We sort of had planned that would probably take the entire day, so we have to go back and look. We can't
Okay,
top
just-
our heads think about what else we can deal with tomorrow.
Oh, we have a couple other motions that are being filed. One on limiting law enforcement's opinion on during testimony.
can you see if you can play this?
Ian?
It's gonna.
I'm sorry, Ms. McNeil, are we on the, I'm gonna
No.
listen to this.
Doesn't have to be on the record. I can put it in here.
We'll get you a list first thing in the morning, okay, Judge?
I'm sorry, Melissa, what did you say the other motion was?
It's a motion limiting to prohibit, law enforcement's opinions about Nikolas's credibility, or some things that the motion's eliminate, some things from Curcio that he says.
You haven't filed it yet.
No, I'm just waiting to combine the exhibits.
All right, let's do this. We'll be in recess till tomorrow at 1:30, and we'll plan on being here for the duration of the afternoon. If you all would please get together and make a list of what is going to be heard tomorrow, and have a plan also for Friday, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Judge, can I just say one thing for the record? And I know that it doesn't really factor into the court's determination, but I just want to clarify the record. And with all due respect to Ms. McCann, and I do have a lot of respect for her, I don't believe the court ruled that the EHAC aggravator applies to this case. I don't know how the court.
Aren't we arguing this all like tomorrow?
No. She's talking about a prior ruling. The court denied our motion to declare it unconstitutional. The court found that it's not unconstitutional. The court did not find that it applied to this case. I just wanted to clarify that for the record.
Okay, I'm happy to hear those arguments when I have the photos to look at so that I can make an informed decision, okay?
And Your Honor, after this court views the videos and photographs,
Yes.
I think the evidence will speak for itself with regarding heinous, atrocious, and cruel.
Okay, so we're gonna start tomorrow at 1. Please have an itinerary or a schedule of what is going to be heard tomorrow and what is going to be heard Friday. And other than that,
Judge, I just ask, please, that the social court reach out to Dr. Adler today so we can get confirmation on the dates for August, put all that into play.
I certainly will. He's in another time zone, so I may not hear back from him until tomorrow, but I will.
okay, everyone has their to-do list. Everyone, please do your best,
Can we approach real quick?
including me.
Ms. McCann or any member of the state, please?
No.
Those are just old photos.
Jen, are you sure that it's on here? Can you just go up there with your number?
Terry, what did you say is closing? When did you say you're closing?
Judge?
I had my assistant, Ms. McElroy, email you back, thank you, and thank you for the courtesy copies of the motions, but you need to set down hearings with my assistant, because
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I've asked repeatedly to set this motion. I did in my cover email and in my letter to your assistant last week, like 8-9 days ago.
I just read it, and I didn't see
said
that.
In the letter and in the email, and everybody has a copy, and they can say, I've been trying to get this motion set, and it relates respectfully to everything the court is gonna start deciding about these photographs and videos. And we've been waiting.
How does the admissibility of evidence relate to the media?
Because what you're going to be deciding, well, first of all, admissibility of all evidence in front of the jury will be important. But when this court is considering these sensitive photos, this is exactly what this motion is directed to. And with all due respect, we have been working with the state and the defense and talking about this motion and did not want to interrupt the court's jury selection process with this motion, but the time has now come, and I have been repeatedly asking.
And I'm pretty sure I already went over this morning, that I was going to allow a certain number of representatives to come up at the conclusion of each day, and whatever is in evidence can view it.
With all due respect, Your Honor, that's not...
Listen, stop with the all due respect, because everybody knows what that means, please.
Okay.
They teach that in judge school, if you want to know the truth.
Your Honor, you have not ruled on my motion and the news media's motion, and there are about probably 30 news organizations that have joined this motion. I have talked to the state and the defense. I have their positions, and this morning's ruling did not cover the issues raised.
Like what?
For example, we have asked that when the court shows the jury sensitive evidence that has been designated by the state, such as crime scene photographs, I'm guessing autopsy photographs, victim photographs.
Okay, and you're asking what?
What we're asking is that the media be allowed to look at those contemporaneously, or, pardon me?
Absolutely not.
Okay, well, that's where we have a problem, Your Honor, and I would just ask that you read our motion. We have a First Amendment right to those
Okay,
materials.
I'll hear your motion, tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock.
Thank you, Your
So if
Honor.
everyone can please be here, I have made accommodations for the media. Viewing the stuff at the end of each day, I suppose, is not good enough. So I'll hear your argument tomorrow.
You're not right, that's not correct, but I'll be
Yes,
glad.
it is. You're saying you want to view it simultaneously.
No, I'm not saying that.
Contemporaneously. What does that mean then?
That's
That means at the same time.
No, it doesn't. It's sensitive evidence, we are not asking to view at the same time, and I'd be glad to go through it with you, Your
You
Honor.
just told me contemporaneously with the jury.
Then I misspoke about the sensitive evidence.
Okay, the sensitive evidence at the end of each day, you can have a representative from the media come up to the clerk and view the evidence.
Your
If
Honor.
you want more than that, you can tell me about it tomorrow at 11.
Okay, thank you. May I have a photo?
Sure. We put the white ones on this. All right, we're in recess.